James Farr here, live from Pasadena Media Studios. Get ready for more piercing and provocative Conversation Live starts now. And welcome to another episode of the Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. Today we're going to have a very critical and possibly uncomfortable conversation. My guest today is Pasadena board member Michelle Richardson Bailey. Michelle, we want to talk about the state of black education, our young men, pedagogy, education, and the culture. But for context, let's roll in this video and then we'll come back and have this discussion.
And so we began to go through the process of trying to identify what is it that causes young African American males to disengage from school? What is it that they're experiencing? And we found out the number one factor contributing to disengagement is our young African American males do not make the critical connection between education and their future financial well-being. In other words, how is this stuff you're teaching me in school going to get me paid? How is an A on a report card equal a $100 bill? Because I guarantee you one thing, that there are always two things on a child's mind who comes from poverty. And those two things are food and money. I'm hungry. I need to eat. I need money to buy some clothes. And if you can't tell me how education is going to get me one or the other or both, I may disengage.
Michelle, you agree or disagree?
Well, I agree that it's happening for those reasons, but I don't agree that those are the only reasons.
How so? What do you mean?
So, like when I was coming up, education was twofold. You got it at home first. Those things that he's mentioning, you know, about how young African American males are disconnected because they don't see how getting an education in public education in school can get them to where they're putting food on the table and making money. They don't see that. Well, we were taught that at home. We were prepared at home from our family unit that these are the things that you need to expect in life, and these going to school and getting that education gets you to the point where you will be able to sustain, you know, life after school into adulthood.
But when the kids are at school, I mean, you as a board member and you know, your constituency, some would say our parents, no, it's the kids. Those are who you're advocating for. Generational things are different right now, you know, and so the lessons that you may have been taught when you were coming up, our communities were different then. Life was different, the world was different. How is it that we're making that he was able to make that assertion that, again, right now these kids can't connect that A to a $100 bill because they're hungry, with all the societal determinants that they have to take into account even getting to school? Still really trying to understand why are they not connecting it?
So, you know, I go back to, some of it is due to the breakdown of the family unit and the fact that that those conversations that provoke critical thinking in African American children while they are young are not happening at home. They could be happening if, say for instance, you have associations or affiliations with churches. They could be happening in the church, in the churches, in Sunday school, in Vacation Bible School. Any opportunity that any adult has or any child has to receive information that will help them learn, you know, that's where those opportunities could be happening. I think because of the fact that African American families, especially those who are really struggling socio and economically wise, because they aren't focused so much on that connection, seeing that connection, their kids, their students tend to mimic what they see in their parents. So if I see my parent is struggling, that's what I'm learning. I'm learning how to struggle. But if I see my parent engaging in my education and advocating for the things that I need to have so that I can be productive in society and go on to college and pursue a career, then those are the things that I'm gonna go after.
Is it the school's responsibility? Okay, let's acknowledge there are some deficiencies, if you will. You know, there are some families that are struggling. There are some people that model behavior for their children that maybe you or I wouldn't agree with. Is it the school's responsibility to kind of supplement that and fill in that gap? Or what responsibility does the school have?
You know what, I think that the schools are leaning more towards trying to supplement that fact. I mean, you see it with the academies that are happening. You know, there are specialized programs that teach financing, banking, you know, their trade, they teach in the different trades. The thing that I think it has to be twofold, it has to continue to be twofold, especially within the African American family. There are experiences that African American children and students have just because they're African American, that if they're not supported at home amongst their loved ones and amongst the people that they trust and who really wants to see them be successful. Once they get outside of home, they have to deal with the biases and all of the nuances that go along with just being African American.
Well, I mean, because we're talking about pedagogy right now, you know, and how we are teaching, the relationship with the student and the teacher, and kind of who's in that triangle, that curriculum or the text being there. How are the schools adjusting? Because children are taking in information differently. We live in a digital era. Kids walk around with computers and are able to research things. So how are schools adjusting?
I think there's, like I said, I mentioned that, you know, there's more programming coming in, but there's also professional development that's focusing on addressing those types of biases that people are starting to realize within education, that those biases impede a student's ability to feel valuable, to feel valued in the classroom. And so the more of that type of training that I believe our teachers are exposed to, I think the more they will be able to benefit our students, our African American students, more absent some of those biases that make the students feel devalued.
Okay, let me check in. You're watching The Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. Today, my guest is Michelle Richardson Bailey, and she is a member of the Pasadena Unified School District Board of Directors. And we're talking about some things within the community and within education. We just talked about pedagogy. I must say, and I'd be remiss, Roland Bynum was scheduled to join us today. Mr. Bynum had an emergency. I would just ask you to keep him in your thoughts and prayers for his family. But Michelle and I are going to power through this conversation either way. So I want to talk about the culture, Michelle.
Okay.
Culture is big now. You know, your culture, and within that culture, we got to look at generational gaps, right? You came up in a different era than the era I came up with than the kids we're in now. What is it, Black excellence? What does that mean to you? And because I know this issue with the do-rags came up at John Muir, and you and I kind of talked about that, and we had a difference of opinion. So what is the culture, and how should the culture be defined for our students?
You know what, I think the word culture is huge, especially when it comes, are you only referring to African Americans, or are you saying students in general?
I'm speaking about African American students.
So
we having a family conversation,
okay, so
our culture.
I love family conversations. And so I think when I think about culture, I mean, depending on where you came from, if you came from the South, you know, you bring that Southern influence. You know, if you came from, you know, the Midwest and you're African American, that's a different influence. So for me, first I would take take from my family, the traditions, you know, the practices, the values. You know, I come from a family that is was so religious that when I went about doing things, I always had to make sure it was something that biblically, it was principled there for me.
So you never snuck out the house and,
Yes,
and
I-
changed your clothes and wore
Oh,
a
no.
shorter skirt or some tight bell bottoms?
No, I've snuck out the house, but I always got caught. I wasn't a good sneaker. But no, I never changed my clothes. I never did anything like that.
I mean, because that thing with the do-rags, right? Like, I had no problem with it. I still don't see a problem with it. What my wife and I had discussed is maybe that's not a look that we would allow our son to come out of the house with. But I personally don't have an issue with it, nor do I see kind of the labels that was being put on the students. I mean, you had a different opinion on them wearing the do-rags.
Well, I want to go back to culture because, and then we'll address the do-rag. So the thing for me about culture is Black culture is one thing that we all have in common, and it's when you look at us, you can see the color of our skin. But within Black culture, you have to decide what you want to identify with, because we've come together, we've mixed together, and there's so much in there. Okay, so it's important that each individual decides to define which part of the culture they want to identify with. There are some who decide that they don't want to identify with being Black at all. And you know what, for them, if that works, that's okay. So when you talk about culture, I mean, to me, that's a longer conversation, because I don't see it as just one. I see it as several different buckets of practices and values and teachings and education and just all kinds of things that can influence the life of our Black children.
But a student choosing to wear a headdress or a do-rag, how does that impact their ability to learn?
So back to the do-rags piece, for me and for most folks who I've reached out to regarding that discussion, and I've talked to some 30-somethings, I've talked to some 40-somethings, and most of them are well on their way. They have their college degrees and they're successful. And, we shared in common that we did not think, we were of the opinion that do-rags don't have a place at school, and that school is not the place really to have the conversation. Like I said to you initially, I felt like that was a larger conversation that needed to be had. It was an opportunity, it was a learning opportunity for the students to now understand just what covering your head was derived from, whether you were a Black female or a Black male, all the way dating back to slavery days. And now we see what it's evolved into, but you don't go into an interview for any type of job wearing a do-rag. Even if you're trying to get a record deal, you don't go and sit in front of a studio executive wearing a do-rag.
I mean, you might, but what about the emphasis being on like situational appropriateness and
so that's
there's
what and that's
basically
what needs
like
to,
Mama would say, time and place for everything.
That's
right?
exactly
But
right.
My issue is, how is it that the school all of a sudden becomes the wrong place? Like,
so
how
what
does that
what does education prepare you for?
Well, one opinion is it prepares you to work in an industrial system and to follow rules and to be systematically programmed in how to proceed. That's what some would say.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is, as a 17-year-old senior said to me, how does me wearing a do-rag not make me excellent? You know what I mean? It doesn't impact the ability to learn.
I was never privy to the fact that the association was made between a do-rag and being excellent. Okay, so for me, when I think about education, I think about preparation for college and career. For most, it could just be for career.
Well, as the brother said earlier, kids can't make the correlation between an A and a $100 bill. So that if you go back up that stream and look at, what's happening. So what are the standards that we should be setting, that the school should be setting for kids?
Well, first of all, the school has a set of policies, and one of those policies has to do with dress. And I believe that this whole issue came out of the fact that the district's dress code policy did not allow for do-rags.
It's school site to school site. So
Well, school sites have to conform with the district policies. So I'm sure somewhere in there's a list of appropriate dress attire, and that's what the school sites have to conform to, okay? And so I believe in this instance, what should have happened first was the conversation. And then if the students weren't satisfied, then the conversation should have gone higher than where it was initiated. And the conversation never got to the district staff, nor did it get to the school board until the action was taken.
Yeah.
And so when I look at that and I think about planning and action, you want results. So you have to sit down and you really have to plan that out, and you have to determine what type of results you wanted. I'm still trying to find out, other than the fact that what the paper said, for the reason that the students walked out, what did they really want to accomplish with that?
I think what they wanted to accomplish, because I spoke with some students,
Okay.
and it's the ability to express themselves. It seemed a bit resistant, that they didn't want to conform. It seemed a bit rebellious. I mean, I think in our teenage years, we all get a little bit rebellious. But most importantly, it was for them a matter of self-expression, and administrators or adults telling them what to do and how to do it. And that's not who they feel that they are. Like, what does it have to do with me learning? So it was probably a little misguided in how they executed.
I hope they learned something from not having a well thought out plan, because that's what I got from it. I believe that it was a good discussion. It was a good learning opportunity, and I believe that we owe them the discussion, and we owe them to listen to them. But they also need to reciprocate that. They need to reciprocate that, and that's some of what's missing. The other thing that I've noticed that happens is that, you know, the students are so into this right here that the human factor and the human appreciation of having someone physically in front of you who can touch you and feel you and you can see and hear from, it's almost as if they're irrelevant. If it's not coming from this, it means, you know, literally, you're just wasting my time. Why are you in front of me, kind of, to some. And those are the kind of that's a culture to me that is prevalent amongst students, period. Young people. I mean, even my kids who are in their late 20s now, middle and late 20s, you know, we're challenged with that at times. You know, I find myself having to say to them, look, I'm your mom. I'm not gonna communicate to you on Facebook or social media. You know, well, Mom, you know, no, you need to talk to me. We need to sit down and have that conversation.
I found myself texting my daughter, and she was
Exactly.
upstairs. Let me check in real quick. You're watching The Conversation Live. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. My guest today is Michelle Richardson Bailey, and she is a member of the Pasadena Unified School District Board. And we're talking about pedagogy. We've talked about the culture within Pasadena and African Americans in education. Now I want to really look at the future. You know, we probably have about maybe 4 or 5 minutes before we got to get ready to get out of here. Okay. First thing I want to mention, we'll get this up in the thread later on. The 30th annual African American, it's not African American, but College Expo at PCC is on the 14th of April. That's a Friday. I'll make sure that in the comments and the links that we have more information up for you about that. The topics, I mean, Michelle, you're presenting there as well, right? Are you
I'll
speaking?
be part of a conversation.
Okay, what's the conversation that you're participating in?
I believe it's one where we're kind of talking about appropriateness of attire and dress, that kind of thing.
Look at us using technology. Yeah. We're guilty of what we say the kids are doing.
Right. So the workshops are, if you don't mind, I can.
Go ahead.
So there's going to be a workshop on arts and entertainment. There'll be a panel. They'll be talking about careers, content, creation, building your own brand. There'll be trios programs. We'll be talking about college-going culture, college planning, talking through college support programs available at PCC and TRIO, women and men sessions. There'll be Know Your Rights sessions, financial literacy sessions, counselor workshops, HBCUs, consent in the Black community, adjust your crown, examining perceptions and respectability, code switching, and politics as usual. So all of
That's the one I'm doing.
Are you
Yeah.
politics as usual?
Yeah.
But you know, I believe that all understanding begins with conversation and agreeing to listen and be heard and to hear and then to try to understand. And I think that's an element that's missing right now in culture in general. The other thing, when I think about culture and education in Pasadena, you know, I think about, you know, I was in school when they integrated the schools. So when I first started going to school, all the students there were Black, okay, until they integrated. And then we experienced going to school with other ethnicities. And in some ways, it was good, and in other ways, it became a greater challenge.
How so?
Because all of a sudden, we had our white counterparts who came from, you know, a different place. You know, they had a different standard of living. Their parents were probably more educated, no doubt. They lived in a more prominent part of the community, and so they had different ideologies. And sitting in the classroom, you know, they always raised their hands first, or I began to see where they were called on first, even though I just knew I had the answer, you know. And then so comes the challenges where you start noticing, you know what, you're different from me, and you say these things, or you think this way. And too young at the time to realize that, you know, the teachers were also a part of that process. And we don't know how to change that as young kids. You don't know how to change that. You don't know how to identify with that. And I remember going home complaining to my parent and having him tell me, you always have to be better. You have to study harder. You have to try harder. And I became a bookworm. So, you know, when you ask me the question about sneaking out and doing things like that, I had a totally different focus because I wanted to be better. I wanted to grow up and be something. I wanted to be somebody, and I knew that I was.
Do you ever think we'll come to a time where we're, I'd like to call it, it's a form of oppressive parenting that maybe we all experience, you know, being told that you have to be twice as good, right?
You know what, I didn't tell my kids that.
I'm glad it stopped with you and it stopped with me. So do you think it'll ever come to a point in the culture, and then this will tie into, you know, the future, come a time in our culture where we don't have to tell our kids that they need to be twice as good?
You know what, so the conversation that I had with my kids, I mean, from the minute that they could speak and they start talking about what they wanted to be when they grew up, you know, it started off with them loving their pediatrician and wanting to be pediatricians both, my son and my daughter, my youngest daughter. And then it went to, well, I want to be a policeman. No, you want to be the police chief. I want to be a fireman. No, you want to be the fire chief. Or if it was, I want to be a nurse. No, you want to be the surgeon, or you want to be, and I just kept doing that anytime. And I would let them express why. Why wouldn't you not want to be this? Why wouldn't you? And so we just had the conversations. I never had to say to them, or I never said to them, look at the people around you and try to be better than them if they look different from you, or if they, no. We didn't have those kind of conversations in my home. We focused on who we were as individuals. Like yourself, love yourself. Then you want to do the best for yourself. To me, that's Black excellence. Only because you're Black. If you set your standards high and you focus on you and you don't let anyone else be the excuse for you not making it, because guess what? If you don't, it's because you made up an excuse for why you shouldn't or why you didn't.
Did the little girl, Michelle, grow up and ever think that she would become a school board member, run
So
for public
the little
office.
girl, Michelle, thought that she was going to grow up and be mayor of Pasadena. That was the little girl, Michelle. So yes, I always had aspirations. I was looking back through some middle school yearbooks or junior high yearbooks and saw back then I was on the Human Relations Committee. So, you know, I've always wanted to be the difference.
Any chance you're gonna run in 2020?
For
Mayor.
I'll be running for school board in 2022. I still have lots of work to do there.
So you heard it here first. She's not running for mayor in 2020.
Not yet.
Not yet anyway. Still has some work to do, school board. We got about a couple of minutes before we got to get out of here, Michelle. And again, I appreciate you taking time and sitting down with me and sharing with us and our audience. 20 seconds, your final thoughts about what we've discussed today.
You know what? I just really would like to see the Black community embrace as a whole African American students and education. We need to be the watch now. We need to stand watch. We've witnessed the breakdown of the Black family. You know, we see what it's doing to us educational wise. Along with other factors that date way back in, you know, legislature that keeps us, you know, but it can only happen if we sit there and allow it to continue, you know. And so I think that we need to embrace our students, our family. We're family. And the other thing is we need to start having those conversations with Black students that make them think a little deeper about who they are and where they're headed for the future. You know, we need to do have more critical discussions with them. And we need to go back to informing them how important it is that they realize that they are part of the village.
We're going to park it right there. You're watching The Conversation Live. I'm your host, James Farr. The Conversation Live focuses on social justice, restorative justice, inclusion, and equality. My guest today has been Michelle Richardson Bailey. She's a member of the Pasadena Unified School District as a board member. Join us next Wednesday at 3 p.m. live for more piercing and provocative Conversation Live. And as always, agape. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
The Conversation Live is brought to you by